just figured out. Yeah. Because I have to use and like, yeah. That's why I think yeah. Taking a picture of it? It's football. It's football. Gosh. I told her to print it. That's not bad. Me and Sarah. Yes. Are we gonna keep it a secret? Or just do it? I don't know how to. No. A little like. Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. The gracious gentleman that is allowing us to be here is with us right now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hello. Good evening. My name is Dave Ferguson. I am the pastor of one of the churches that meets here in the Gathering Place. I'm also the president of the board of directors that manages the building. So, on behalf of the River Hill Interfaith Center, I want to welcome you. We are glad to be part of the community. We're glad to engage in the community, with the community, provide a place for meeting and good conversation and respectful interaction, and just glad you're able to be here. So I know there's going to be a prayer in a moment, but I've asked permission to also open us up with a prayer if you don't mind. So I'm going to put on my pastor hat, and I'm going to pray for us. Jesus said, you pray for those who are mean to you. Return good for evil. Return blessing for curses. So even though there's people that disagree with what you're talking about, we offer a spirit of love and grace and blessing to them. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to pray for this time, and we're going to pray for the people who are outside as well. So Father, I thank you for your love. I thank you for the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ. I thank you for the freedom and the opportunity and the prosperity that you've blessed us with in this country. And I thank you for this gathering and this meeting. I just pray for a really positive, clear time of communication and interaction and engagement tonight. Lord, and I do pray for the folks who are standing outside. I pray for their peace. I pray for their protection. I pray for, just want to pray that you would speak to their hearts as well. I pray for peace and understanding. Lord, give us grace, give us peace, give us understanding in this nation. Help us to talk to one another. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Hi, everybody. Glad to see you. My name is Lisa Garrity. I am the Howard County Chapter Chair of Moms for Liberty. Thank you for coming. It's great to see everybody. For those of you who don't know, Moms for Liberty is a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is dedicated to empowering parents. The organization was created by Tiffany Justice and Tina Deskovich, both former school board members who saw what was happening in the classrooms during the pandemic. They saw a lack of substantive learning, little concern for what the parents wanted, and were appalled by the short-sighted and destructive COVID masking policies that directly hurt children and families. In just 3 years, Moms for Liberty has over 2.5 years, has over 330 chapters in 44 states and more than 130,000 members. Moms for Liberty, Howard County, Maryland, is presenting this Gender Ideology Forum to help us all better understand what it means when a child decides to transition and to openly discuss both the benefits and concerns many parents will need to understand to better support a child who begins to feel he or she is suffering from gender dysphoria. Now our member, Susan Dreisch, will lead us in prayer.
Can everyone please stand for the prayer, please? Heavenly Father, we thank you today for all you are and all that you have done for us. We know that you created families and parents to care for their children and protect their children. We ask you to show us how to protect our children and preserve their innocence. We ask tonight that you give us the wisdom to understand the way ask for you to shine your light into this darkness. We ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
And please stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Secretary, Michelle Shallek, is going to lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we are going to do our Madison Minute. And just to give you a little background on why we do it at Moms for Liberty, we do the prayer and the Madison Minute every single time we have a meeting or an event. The Madison Minute is a quote from a founding father. It keeps us grounded in our founding documents. James Madison was known as the father of the Constitution and the force behind the Bill of Rights. Trent Kittleman, our former Maryland State delegate and current candidate for School Board and District 5, woo, yay, Trent, will present our Madison Minute.
Thank you. I'm not sure what any of you use, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Tonight's Madison Minute is on Benjamin Franklin and the Constitution. On the last day of the Constitutional Convention, a lady asked Dr. Ben Franklin, well, Dr. Franklin, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? To which Dr. Franklin replied memorably, a republic, if you can keep it. And that comes up a lot these days. What did Ben Franklin think of the Constitution? Speaking at the Philadelphia Convention in September 1787, Benjamin Franklin offered his cautious and measured support for the new Constitution. Quote, I confess that I do not entirely approve of this Constitution at present, but I doubt whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better Constitution. For when you assemble a number of men who have the advantage of their joint wisdom, you inevitably have from them the men with their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. From such an assembly can a perfect production be expected. It is therefore astonishes me to find that this system approaching so near to perfection as it does. And I think it will astonish our enemies. I consent to this Constitution because I esteem the Constitution to be the best possible that could have been formed under present circumstances, and that it ought to go abroad with one united signature and receive every support and countenance from us. I trust none of you will refuse to sign it. If they do, they will put me in mind of the French girl who was always quarreling and finding fault with everyone around her, and told her sister that she thought it was very extraordinary, but that really she had never found a person who was always in the right but herself. And after the vote, he opined, our new Constitution is now established. Everything seems to promise it will be durable, but in this world, nothing is certain but death and taxes.
All right, now our Vice Chair, Tootie Adler, will introduce our special guests.
Thank you, everyone. I want to wish you all a very warm welcome. We're so excited to have so many friends and neighbors and new friends as well this evening. I'm going to introduce our esteemed guest speakers for this evening. Dr. Kathleen Goonan is an internal medicine physician trained at Massachusetts General Hospital, Harvard, and a health policy expert. Her service and accomplishments are numerous, and I've summarized, though challenging, for our program this evening. Dr. Goonan's career includes senior executive positions in the hospital sector, including Senior Vice President of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, Medical Director of Policy Evaluation and Improvement for Blue Cross Blue Shield, advisory positions with numerous medical groups, as well as teaching and coaching programs throughout the United States. As Director of Parent and Patient Advocacy with GenSpect, Dr. Goonan has worked with over 120 families. GenSpect is an international organization of professionals, trans people, detransitioners, and parent groups who work together to advocate for a non-medicalized approach to gender diversity. Dr. Goonan is an advisor to the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Kathleen Goonan. Now we have, if you think that's, we have something additional to top that. Tom Neumark is a top-notch software engineer, Fortune 500 company. He is the founder of the Classical Charter School in Frederick, Maryland, a stellar accomplishment. The Classical Charter School received the attention of World and News Report and is ranked in the top 5 schools in Frederick for elementary and middle schools. Mr. Neumark trains teachers in computer science, keeping the engineering field in the forefront and desirable for future candidates. A voracious writer, Mr. Neumark has contributed articles featured in the Maryland Public Policy Institute and Education Week. His engineering expertise earned him one of 10 national finalists for a project titled Moonshot, focused on scientifically based reading instruction. The statistics are clear that science-based reading is essential to master the path of reading to learn. Nothing more important. The entity known as Transparency in Education is his current endeavor. Transparency in Education is a Maryland statewide effort to promote science-based approaches to learning. Mr. Neumark is active in efforts to support parental rights, and welcome, Tom Neumark. Our program is going to begin with Dr. Goonan.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to stand up. I think Tom is too. We've done this several times. When you talk. We've done this several times together and have worked together for many months now, and both very passionate about sharing information about this quandary we are in. And as you know, I've worked with GenSpect now for 2 years. I've actually talked to now probably 175 families. I talked about 2 or 3 a week. I talked to 2 moms today, all over the United States generally, but also Canada, Australia, the UK, a couple of people in Germany over the last couple of years. And next week, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine is holding its first international meeting in New York City. It is an invitation-only meeting. The European experts will be there because they were uninvited to present at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Medicine. So we've thrown together a meeting so that they can come to the United States and speak to people. So what we thought would be helpful, you can take us to the next slide. I'm going to go through the medicine side, and Tom is then going to talk to you about the parent advocacy, the school side of things, and then we want to hear your questions. My goal is really to level set you in the science, the evidence around gender dysphoria in children and adolescents, the recent history, the recent trends, what we know and what we don't know. I want to give you a real clear grounding in the evidence around treatment. And again, what we know and what we don't know, and the tremendous challenges and the falsehoods that people have been indoctrinated with, children, adults, teachers, and the falsehoods that they're encountering through the media, through the social environment, and what we need to do to combat it. I also want to give you a flavor for the international debates. We are an outlier compared to the other Western European countries that have far more experience than we do. It's really important to grasp that. And then a little bit about how to talk to your friends, your children, your neighbors. Very much want to get into what do you need to feel more confident to be able to speak to people around you, including children and teens, around this topic. Next slide. So let's just
level set on the facts. Biological sex, we are mammals. There are two sexes. We are a dimorphic species, and it's determined based on the gametes that we are designed to produce. Not everybody does. We're all different. Some of us don't work quite perfectly, but we're all designed either as male or female, and that filters down into every cell in the body. If I ask for a patient to have a kidney transplant, it's important that we know the sex of the donor. I can transplant a kidney from a male to a female, but I need to know the sex because the body is going to respond differently, because every organ in the body is derived from and dictated by the sex of that animal. Gender identity is a new concept. Gender identity was invented in the 1960s as a theoretical concept, and it has exploded into our lexicon and into the culture over the last 10 to 20 years. Many books are being written about how that's happened, why that's happened. That's not the topic for today, but suffice it to say, it's a theoretical construct that we could spend the next 4 hours debating as to where it comes from and what its basis is. It is not related to biological sex. Transgender persons are people who identify as the opposite sex to their natural biology, their natal sex. And gender nonconforming people, I would argue I'm a gender nonconforming person. I have always wanted to do what the boys did. I'm a gender nonconforming person. All of us, basically, the bottom line is we're unique. But gender stereotypes, gender conformity, nonconformity, those words are now in the lexicon, and we hear them a lot, but the truth of the matter is we're all unique and we're all different in many, many dimensions of life. Next slide. And personality. So what is gender dysphoria? Now, gender dysphoria is discordance or dis-ease, uncomfortable feelings about one's biological sex. It is a medical diagnosis. It is part of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, the DSM-5, which is the Manual for Psychiatric Diagnoses. It has evolved somewhat over the last 20 years, but the bottom line is it is a psychiatric diagnosis because people who experience it are in great distress. That distress can vary to mild to severe, but there are people who generally, they feel they were born in the wrong body. They often, and again, the other thing I would say to you about the science here that's really important to understand is because the United States has failed to treat this condition and its management as in terms of it as an experiment, right? We are doing treatments to people who experience gender dysphoria that should be considered experimental treatments, but we are not. Because of that, most of what I'm telling you about the science is squishy. We are not conducting the kind of studies that we should be conducting to understand the changes we're making in schools and in clinics and in medical offices. So when I make general statements, I want you to understand as a caveat, we are not studying this properly. So we can only draw certain conclusions. The other thing about people who experience gender dysphoria is some of them, not all of them, adopt a transgender identity. They may or may not do that. That varies over time, and it may be something they choose to do or not choose to do. So now what has happened recently? This is really important to understand. If you ran a psychiatric hospital for teenagers in 2014, you hadn't seen children who came in with gender dysphoria. That would be a common scenario. You would have not encountered a child who came in and said, 2 years ago I was wearing tutus, I was doing ballet, and now I am a boy. That was a new phenomenon, okay? And so this is not gonna work. Let me see if it's just not on. Okay. So this is 2010 up to 2015, and the turquoise here are females. Okay, so we had almost no, it was about 2 in 10,000, 1 in 10,000 children would experience gender dysphoria. They were typically little boys, and they were feminine little boys who liked girls' stuff, they liked girls' clothes, they liked girl toys, and they presented at very early ages without self-awareness. They were simply very female identified. That was the 1 in 10,000 up until 2015. Then it all of a sudden took off in frequency among teenage girls. This turquoise here is all teenage girls. And it has gone up 5,000% in the UK, where we have some of the best statistics. Because we're not treating this as experimental, because we're commercialized the care to these children, we've gone from 40 clinics to 400 clinics in this country. We don't know how many children. We can only look at population-based statistics if we look at insurance claims, but that's not a very good way to measure how common this is. So we know it's exploded here as well. And these other bars up here are children who say they are not sure what they are. So the largest growing number of kids in this cohort of kids in distress are kids who simply say they don't know what they are. Next slide. So there are these 4 types of gender dysphoria, and just want to make clear what they are, because you probably, when you hear about these cases, or you hear about children, or your children encounter it, they are encountering potentially variations on this. The first is childhood onset. This is the historical type that was typically little boys. And what we know from work done in Canada and Europe, where they have tracked their data really fairly well, 60 to 90% of those little boys eventually came to understand, I'm a male. Many of them, perhaps half or more, ended up, and if anybody wants these slides, I'm happy to send them to you. More than, probably 2/3 to 3/4, 90% of them grew up to accept themselves as male. Possibly as many as half or more turned out to be homosexual, and they went on to lead healthy lives with no medical intervention, okay? That was the typical scenario. Then there's the comorbidity-mediated category of young people, meaning kids who have experienced divorce, trauma personally or trauma at home, alcoholism at home, psychiatric disease within the family, any number of other diagnoses, and they present with anxiety, with depression, with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and they present with these. In addition, they present then with gender dysphoria. And oftentimes what we're seeing is the other symptoms predate the gender dysphoria, so the depression, anxiety predates gender dysphoria, but when they're coming into the medical facilities, and we see this particularly in all the gender clinics, we know it happened extensively in England, where they've actually shut down their gender clinic, because kids were coming in with all kinds of symptoms, but there's a thing called diagnostic overshadowing. If they said anything about their gender, they got treated for gender dysphoria and transitioned. And the other diagnoses went untreated. Sure,
Hey,
Tara.
do you know if the rates of bulimia and anorexia in young girls have gone down?
Do I know what the rate is of that now?
Yeah, like since gender dysphoria has gone up in young girls, has bulimia and anorexia gone down?
Bulimia and anorexia have gone down. I couldn't tell you the exact statistics, but what you're really asking is this a social contagion, the way the eating disorders were in the 90s, 80s, 90s? The answer to that is yes, but the medical literature is refusing. The establishment journals, JAMA and others, have refused to publish the studies and have critiqued and attacked the scientists who have attempted to document the social contagion aspect of this. We know it's a social contagion, but they're refusing to acknowledge it. I can tell you about schools. I went to University of California at Davis Medical School. Davis, California has the highest percentage of trans-identified students in all of California. Now that may have changed because that was a year ago, and because it follows social patterns, it could well have passed as a social contagion. I can tell you many art schools like charter art schools in New Mexico. I've talked to parents in different states where they'll call me and they'll say, 1/3 of my child's classmates are non-binary or trans-identified. And then it goes through the social culture of the school. So very, very important point. Then there's this thing, and again, let's see, now it's working. Rapid onset gender dysphoria. This is the notion that children who, when they were younger, were typical kids, and then around 11, 12, 13, often in association with a period of a lot of social media contact, maybe a loss of a friend or a breakup with an early kind of friendship or romance, a minor, seemingly potentially minor trauma, maybe they get bullied for some reason, the color of their socks or whatever else. Kids can be mean, we all know that. Boom, they get out online, they are exposed to the idea that the solution to the reason why they feel not like they don't fit in is because they're in fact the opposite sex. And they get exposed to this idea through a friend group or through social media or the internet. And next thing you know, they've decided this is what they're going to do. And then it's also then not unusual for it not to be divulged to the parents, but divulged to other people at school first. And that's where we get into the cycle of difficulties that we're in. This diagnosis has not been accepted by my colleagues. It is not an authorized, accepted diagnostic category, which is a travesty. We should be studying this, we should be trying to understand it, we should be documenting how frequent it is, what causes it, how do you prevent it, how do you ensure that children get appropriate care, because I can't tell you how many, and again, we don't know, but many, many of these kids are in distress for some reason that needs attention from parents, caring adults, clergy, school, and potentially professionals. And they're not getting it because they're getting affirmed in the gender identity as the only intervention. And then, of course, there are long-standing, settled, incongruent people. There are people for whom their gender dysphoria is a lifelong condition. What we know about them is that their lives are challenging. We know that if they medicalize, they are going to experience tremendous risks for cancer, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, all kinds of different conditions. We know that they are going to suffer consequences, long-term consequences, if they choose to do surgical interventions. They're going to suffer surgical consequences that aren't, again, well documented in terms of their prevalence. And we know that they have an dramatically increased incidence of suicide. So these are folks that are leading difficult lives, and I, as a primary care internist, was trained to see if I can find a way to help them, just like anybody with hypertension in this room who takes medication, find a non-medical way to cope with the problem, right? We would, in an ideal world, I want everyone in this room to not need to take drugs for the issues that they deal with in their health. I want to help you find a way to live a healthy life without medication or surgery. That's the job of a primary care doctor. So that's what I tell the young people I deal with who are experiencing this, is let's see if we can find a solution that is not medical. So here are the three approaches. My thing is working now. I'm not sure how that happened, but the magic of IT. Three approaches. Now I've got them in order of how common they are in the world, but I will tell you I will reverse this in terms of how I advise families, right? But the most common approach to this is gender affirmation. That's a construct. We're not affirming anybody's gender, right? We are actually, in fact, you've heard the debate about conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is what happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s to homosexual, same-sex attracted people around the Western world. Thankfully, it was stopped in about the 80s or so. But, you know, we literally, there was a period of time, it was a shameful period of time when in England, Europe, and the United States, people experimented with what were almost torturous kinds of interventions to stop same-sex attraction. That was conversion therapy. Now the word gets applied in this context. If I find someone, a psychotherapist, who will help them work on sorting out why they're thinking of changing their sex or taking drugs to become the opposite sex, that in the media is getting called, and in some legal settings getting called, the new conversion therapy. It's not conversion therapy at all. It's exploratory therapy. Why do you have these feelings? Where do they come from? Where did the distress start? So, but gender affirmation is actually truly conversion therapy, because what we're doing is encouraging people that they can actually become the opposite sex, and that we can give them drugs and surgery to make them go from being male to female. So that's the ultimate conversion therapy, but we're calling it gender affirmation. And the reason why I feel so strongly about this is I talk to detransitioners on a regular basis. I have a stable of young adults who've been through this, who realized they were naive, they were young, they were same-sex attracted, many of them were male, so they were told, you can't be a gay guy, you can't be gay, you need to become a woman. And you need to go through medical treatment and surgical treatment to be normal. And now they're living with the consequences of having done that, which are pretty devastating. So that's gender affirmation, and it does begin when adults around a child change the name and pronouns. So it is well known now from the research we do have that if you change a child's name and pronouns and tell them that they can transition, they can become the opposite sex, you're putting them on a path that's going to significantly increases the chances that they will go on to medical intervention. So when I'm talking to parents, what I want to help them do is help reality-base the child in the fact that they're either male or female, and then sort out your personality can be anything. Your life can be anything, but you are either male or female. The psychotherapy is absolutely called for in many cases, but I say this, any parent dealing with a child who has issues, you can't outsource parenting, and you can't outsource a major problem to a professional. And if you feel that in many cases that may be necessary, you've got to get a holistic approach that involves not just the family, but all caring adults around that young person to help them cope with whatever it is that's causing them distress. And a professional can supplement that, but of course, you can imagine how many 14-year-olds are capable of self-reflection and therapeutic intervention. I mean, it's a pretty tough thing to do. So I've come to the conclusion this is the most important thing. We're doing watchful waiting, it looks something like this. I can see this is really important to you. I understand you, Bill, feel that you need to be Barbara, and I get that, but you're a boy. And so we're going to sort out what's going on here, and we're going to take a look at all the things going on in life with the friends, with the social media, with the access to the internet and so forth to move ahead. Yeah.
For your psychotherapeutic approach, in Maryland, at the age of 13, your child can actually request that you not be part of their therapy. So what do you suggest in that case? Because I actually did have them try to pull that, and so I'm wondering what a more tactful approach to the problem might be.
Yeah, you screen the therapist extensively. And therapists have a lot of latitude to work closely with parents without violating that law. There are lots of therapists who are mature enough to understand that the perspective of the parents is essential to an effective therapeutic relationship with that child. And therefore the input of the parent to that therapeutic relationship is necessary if they're going to be an effective professional. And so there are lots of ways very skilled therapists can work within that law and work in partnership with the parents. But you have to find people who understand that and who are not deceptive about how they're going to approach whatever psychiatric issue they're dealing with the child. That's not unusual. That is probably as bad as any of them, but I think California may be worse. But there are many states with that similar kind of law. There are lots of therapists, especially in the gender world. There's a growing network of therapists on the resource list I'll give you. It's called GETA, the Gender Exploratory Therapy Association. GETA.org is all therapists who are being trained up in gender and the associated diagnoses with gender confusion, and they understand how to work within those laws and yet also work carefully with parental input.
Are you aware that in Howard County, they're putting the psychiatrists in the schools now?
Tom will talk about that, yes, we'll come back.
Okay.
Yeah, let's come back to that one, Tom. And I don't have a whole lot more here, so let me move through this. This is probably the most important slide in a lot of ways, because our friends outside really think that this is a civil rights issue, and this is trans is the new gay, and I'm evil because I'm unwilling to lump everybody who's gender nonconforming under the rainbow flags. And I'm unwilling to do that because I see every individual as an individual, and they're all unique, and they simply, every human being deserves respect. Any child, for any reason, is potentially vulnerable to being bullied, for having freckles, for wearing glasses. I mean, you name it. Kids can be. So we have to teach them to be resilient. We have to teach them to stick up for themselves, and adults have to protect all children from disrespect. Gender dysphoria is a diagnosable medical condition. Being homosexual is not. Now, I'm not an expert in brain research around homosexuality, but homosexual people do not need medical intervention, right? And whereas the world is saying trans or non-binary people need major medical interventions. So it's really important, and gender dysphoria is a form of distress. It's a form of deep distress that needs to be addressed appropriately so that people are not living with that level of distress. So I mentioned this about the European controversy. The only journal in all the journals of the world, medical journals, which are respected, the only journal that has acknowledged controversy around medical treatment for these folks is the British Medical Journal. And it was a huge day for us when they acknowledged there's debate. There's very deep debate. But, it's extraordinary. So I mentioned at the beginning, there are several countries, UK, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Belgium, and France. The Scandinavian countries have been involved with transitioning adults who have unresolved, sustained gender dysphoria for decades. They have extensive history in this field. They have stopped transitioning children. Why? Because it didn't help them. It didn't help them. So a panel of these scientists who've worked in this field for decades applied to present at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Medicine this month in New York City. 8 of them, and they were rejected. So hence, they're coming to New York next week with the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, which is a small, independent organization with no money, and we've got a benefactor to help us put on the meeting. It's by invitation only, because the Europeans think we're nuts here, and they're afraid for their safety. And we're going to hear what they have to say. I called 25 of my colleagues from my career that I know from having this long career that I've had. None of them are willing to come to the meeting. Several of them said, I'm very nervous. I'm very nervous about this. But none of them were willing to come and show up to hear what the Europeans have to say. So, you know, and Rita Kaltalia, the head child psychiatrist for the country of Finland, will be there next week. I met her in May in Ireland. She's a brilliant woman. 200 publications in this field. This is a very progressive-minded person who's worked with transgender adults her entire career. She is sounding the alarm on affirmative care. She's now basically out internationally saying this is dangerous for these children. They have multiple psychiatric diagnoses that aren't getting attended to. So this is going to be very exciting. And she's, you know, we don't have time to go through the whole issue of well, would you rather have a live son or a dead daughter notion that these children will commit suicide. It's wrong. It's flat out wrong. They actually don't commit suicide. They talk about it a lot. In England, where they have shut down the Tavistock gender identity clinic, they did a FOIA request and pulled out the statistics, and out of, I'm not going to get this exactly right, but it's out of 15,000 cases over 11 years, there were 4 suicides. 2 were in treatment and 2 were waiting for treatment. That is lower than eating disorders, suicide. That's lower than the suicide rate in depression. It's higher than kids without psychiatric disorders, to be sure. Every suicide is a tragedy, to be sure. We all know that. But to medicalize children because of a false threat, when we also, the other thing is that we're dealing with psychiatric disorders with teenagers of all kinds, for all sorts of reasons right now. And we know a lot about how to treat depression and anxiety with children. We don't have a lot of resources or people willing to do it. But this is not an unknown territory. So this is a really important issue. And no, the suicide rate is not dramatic.
Under the new Maryland law, where Medicare will pay for transition for children as young as 9 years old, 10 or 2. Under the new Maryland law, they will pay as I don't know that is there a requirement that there be any psychological evaluation, or is it just because the kid says so?
I'm not up to speed on that exact question.
That law took effect, I believe, this month.
Yeah. Sorry. So in terms of the requirement, the law did not specify a requirement with regard to psychotherapy. It's very likely they will follow the WPATH standards, which also don't require any kind of psychotherapy. There's a whole history with that. WPATH's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and they've issued like 8 versions of their standards, and the latest one dropped any requirement.
I think that in the legal ease of that, the standard of care that they're using came from WPATH, I believe.
Oh yeah, almost certainly. Yeah, everybody's basing it on WPATH. GenSpect is coming out with an alternative set of guides to WPATH in November. Because WPATH is a self-declared international expert in this. It has a long history, and it's a very complicated history, but it is an openly activist organization. There are clinicians involved with it, but many clinicians who historically were involved in it have left, including transgender people who are in clinical practice working with transgender people have left WPATH. So it is itself a highly controversial organization, but it has influenced the American Academy of Pediatrics. So, but you know, parents who take their child to a gender clinic are asking for this. That's the problem. And you have to stop it at the door. I would never recommend anybody take their children to a gender clinic. So just real briefly, wait a minute, am I going the right way? No. The issues with affirmative care. Everyone agrees there's very low quality evidence. In the footnotes of the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, they all acknowledge very low quality evidence. And yet we're pursuing this. The suicide claims are false. I could send you the references on it. There's plenty of it, but they are false. Social transition. This is the most important thing for you all to understand when you're dealing with other people. Social transition is a very powerful psychosocial intervention that causes gender dysphoria to persist. So we need to avoid it. We need to find a way to help children understand they are the biology that they are. Their personality can be however it wants to be. They can be whoever they want to be, but they are biologically male or female. There are all kinds of false assumptions about causes, including the notion that there's a brain science that defines it. The brain studies are very nascent. I'm going to learn a lot about the brain science studies that we do have next week, because we're bringing in the people who can speak to it, but we basically don't know yet what that would be all about. Puberty blockade is not a benign pause. If you shut down, everybody in this room has been through puberty. It is an extraordinarily complex system of changes that goes on throughout the entire body. And if you stop it, you're stopping the development of the brain, the lungs, the heart, the kidneys, the digestive system, and yes, the reproductive system. You're stopping it. We don't know what happens to those children or how. I can tell you, I've talked to dozens of young ladies who have gone on puberty blockers and then gone on to cross-sex hormones, whose voice changed, and now it's not changing back after a matter of a few months. So we're not, again, also not studying the consequences. And child self-diagnosis, I mean, there is no other diagnosis where we have the child diagnose themselves, right? Where did that come from? We've never done that before. The complications of the hormones are dramatic. And then, of course, what child can give consent? You know, you can't rent a car till you're 25, right? You can't get a tattoo until you're 18. There are, you know, there are just many, many questions here. And then detransition is increasing. We don't know. What we do know is there are plenty of young people who did transition who are now very deeply regretful and living with the consequences. So when your child brings it up, well, let's come back to this. Let's give Tom his day here. And we'll come back to these questions. But I will say, I'll stop with this slide. This house is going to fall, and you're going to help it fall by being informed and being rocks and being clear with young people and being clear with teachers and sticking up for your kids and your friends whose kids are affected by this. Boys are boys, girls are girls, people can be whoever they want to be. And you can literally help this house of cards fall.
Dr. Goonan, thank you so much. Your words are very comforting because the States are telling us everything that you've just told us. So thank you so much. You've just put a soft blanket of comfort over so many of us here in the room this evening. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Tom?
Oh, yep, thank you.
This is a tough act to follow.
It's very tough. So to start the slides, if you go to the bottom right there, you'll see a thing that looks a little bit like a projector on the right-hand side. And you'll go all the way down and to the left one more, and one more to the left, and then that should do it. Go ahead and hit it.
Sorry, I forgot my glasses.
Oh. Just so everybody can see.
Right here.
I can hit it if you want.
I'm so sorry.
It's the icon to the left of the one you're hitting.
This
Right
one?
there.
Yeah, it looks like a little
Oh.
and it should. Yeah. Here, let me hit it.
I'm so sorry.
Unless somebody else knows, I'll get it for you. All right, let me pause for technical difficulties.
There it is.
Yay! All right, thanks, Lisa. So I'm going to go over the policy side of this. So the question is, now that you know kind of the basics of what gender dysphoria is, you know, you're here, I'm here, let's change our school systems tonight to have good policies, right? What does that look like? So the next slide, if we go to that, is... Oh, it does work? Awesome. Is our proposal. So this is a proposal that we worked on, Dr. Goonan and I worked on for the entire country, and a bunch of other PhDs and doctors, scientists, psychologists, etc. put together. I think it's the largest, most comprehensive policy in the world. So it's 27 pages. Most of that is the science, which you've heard a lot about tonight, and then some of it is actually the policy statements themselves. And we put those together because the first thing you'll notice if you try to present things to the opposition, oh, you guys are anti-science. Well, we have like 100 citations supporting our views on this, and Dr. Goonan just explained it very, very well. So go to the next slide here. Let's see, do I hit this one? All right. So this is a guide to what we said. Now it's not working. Yeah, I might just rely on you if that's okay. My aim is bad. I'm shooting the mirrors. All right, if you go to the next one, we should. So the goal, and this is what the folks outside think our goal is not, but it really is our goal, is to help kids develop stable adult identities, whatever they are. You know, you may end up transgender. It's rare, but you may. And we want folks to be able to live freely, openly, and visibly in society. So you see signs that kind of imply that we want to do the exact opposite, but that's actually not what we want to do. But what we're trying to do is create a school environment that encourages healthy exploration and not steering, right? When you go and you tell a child, you know, okay, I agree with you. You really are the opposite sex. That's steering. Whether you intend it or not, Olson in 2022 found that 94% of the kids who were told that ended up identifying as transgender. As Dr. Goonan said, it prolongs the gender dysphoria. So it's not a neutral act. All right, we can go to the next one. So here it is. If there's one slide you want to pay attention to, we can send these to you as well. This is what our policy says versus pretty much every other policy in America that's on the other side of this. And ours was specifically comparing Frederick County Public Schools, so that's why you see the FCPS in here, but you could put HCPS in here, you could put in BCPS, they're all pretty much the same. Whether the schools have a written policy or not, the de facto policy through guidance that the administrators are giving is pretty much going to be that current column there. They all say the same thing because they're all getting the same advice from WPATH and GLSEN and other advocacy organizations on the other side of this. So the first thing is parental notification. It's optional. The school has decided that if your child's uncomfortable talking about their gender identity with you, they're going to conclude there's something wrong at home, and so you should know as a parent. Well, my goodness, how many of you in this room have talked about your gender identity with your parents, right? You don't have a bad relationship with your parents. I mean, it's one of the most ridiculous conclusions I've ever heard, but they genuinely believe, and they'll say this out loud, like, oh, there must be some reason. Prove that. What is your reason? Why a child who may be an adolescent, who's going through a phase where they're just angry at mom and dad? Yeah, they may not want to tell you because they're angry at mom and dad, right? Or it's a young kid that's just embarrassed because they don't really understand what's going on with them. Yeah, because they're a young kid who's embarrassed. It doesn't mean the relationship between the child and the parent is wrong at all, or there's any problem. But that's the assumption that's being made. It's an unjustifiable assumption, but they repeat it over and over and over again. And some of our policymakers on the Board of Education have come to think, oh yeah, that makes sense. But if you really stop to think about it for a second, it doesn't make any sense at all. So that's the first one. And so in our policy, we would guarantee it, unless the school knows that these are abusive parents, and they shouldn't know, not just about gender, but about anything. These are parents that might beat their kids because they have report card problems, or they get in a fight, or whatever it might be. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that in a very, very small percentage of cases, there are parents who are unfit. But you have a right as a parent to be told that you're unfit, and you get to go to court about it, and you get to argue about it. You don't just get the school teacher who's, maybe a young teacher, 25 years old, who's never had kids before, decide you're a bad parent. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But that is the current policy in schools all across Maryland and all across the country. All right, so that's the first one. And then the school approach is they affirm your choice. So it should be called gender affirmation therapy. It should be called gender agreement therapy, right? Gender agreement approach. All the schools do is whatever they say, they agree with right away. The child says they're biologically a girl. They say they're a boy immediately. Yep, that's what you are. There's no psychological diagnosis. There's no questioning. There's no talking to mom and dad. If the child wants to keep it a secret, it makes no sense, but that's the policy that they're following. So ours would say, parents get to choose. You can go through all the options that Dr. Goonan just described to you and decide. If you're a parent that is a true believer, you are like some of the folks out here, that genuinely believe that is the best thing for the child, that's fine. I wouldn't recommend that. But as a parent, you have a right to raise your kids the way you want. And if you have a different interpretation of the scientific evidence than we do up here, we're saying as a matter of policy, you can do it. But just don't force your views on us. Right? Which you probably saw that sign out there that said something to the effect of, you shouldn't be parenting our children. Great, we agree. How about you not parent ours as well, right? Yeah. So that's the issue. So then all the other things about changing overnight stays and sports participation are all based on gender identity. So you can assert one day that you're a guy and maybe you've lost a little too much in baseball and you want to go and join the girls' team. You can do that. It's all based on gender identity, not biological sex. Obviously, there are safety issues. There's differences in bone density. And it's not just to strengthen that they're going to win, but if you collide with a boy that's been through puberty, he's got a lot more bone density than a girl does. There's going to be injuries. And there's been cases, I'm sure all of you know, of people who've gone through that and actually had some pretty serious damage. And then breast binders and tucking, this one floors me. So we proposed this to the Frederick County Public Schools and have spent now 8 months advocating for this with bigger and bigger crowds as this has gone on. And I said, okay, in one of my speeches, I said, okay, you don't want to pass all this complicated stuff, I get it. Could you at least pass the breast binder thing? Agree that you're not going to let any staff member allow a girl to bind her breast and provide that medical device to her. Nope, they would not even consider that. So that's how hard over some of these folks are on boards of education. It's like, forget everything, here's one provision everyone should agree on. Nope, they don't want to agree to it. So, but that is actually happening. There's a mom that actually is suing over this in Rhode Island, that her daughter was provided with a breast binder at school by staff. Right? So violating every ethical, medical, standard I think you could come up with. So it is unfortunately a real thing. We didn't put that in to shock anybody. It's actually to prevent something that happened from happening here in Maryland. And then FCPS, and HCPS and all the Maryland districts, they're not providing information. The information that Dr. Goonan just provided, yeah, they should have something like that. They have it for anxiety, they have it for depression. If you look at those little scriptographic books that are in the counseling office, they have those things. They don't have a gender dysphoria packet. They believe in gender identity, right? Which is gender ideology, I should say, which is this belief that you can be born in the wrong body. They're not providing objective clinical advice or even just resources like here, go, there's a debate about this, here's, pros and cons, go look at it. Schools are not providing that. They're really pushing this direction of gender ideology instead of objective scientific advice, which they do for other things like anxiety, depression, eating disorders. You can go in any counseling office in high school and you'll find pamphlets on that, but you won't on this. And then, so we would insist that they provide that, right? And we'd insist to be based on our policy that actually reflects science, so it's accurate. That's the trick, right? If you let them do it and then they put in gender ideology and confuse folks because it's not actually accurate, you have to be careful. So we were very specific in the policy of what things should be said and how objectively they should be stated on both sides of it. And then there's no research cited in the current policy. So like your administrators largely are just writing letters saying, here's what we're going to do, whatever the child says goes. That's basically their advice. There's no science behind it. Even the written policies, like Frederick County's, they cited GLSEN, which is an advocacy group, and they basically copied and pasted this advocacy group's supposedly model policy, and turned it into our policy. But there's literally no citation. And then the only thing they cited was FERPA. And FERPA is a law which protects your right as parents to have access to your child's education records. And amazingly, in Frederick County, they said FERPA was the reason they could keep a secret, except that FERPA actually is the reason you can't keep secrets. That's actually what the law says. And if you look at any of your policies that are written down in Maryland, they all cite FERPA. So they're citing the law that is the exact opposite of what it really says. So it's kind of amazing that I don't know these laws. Some lawyer somewhere was asleep, and then everybody just copied it. I guess I don't know how they came up with that. But your rights are actually protected under FERPA and some other statutes. But they are actually citing that as a reason that you're not allowed to know about your child's mental health concerns. And then, so we have over 100 research citations, and we actually call the condition what it is, gender dysphoria. I have a picture on my phone I carry around because people don't believe me it's a real condition. I'm like, yeah, see, it's page 511, like you can go look it up. There's a picture and there's a whole chapter in it in the DSM-5. So it is a real condition, but so many folks, because of kind of the prevailing winds in the media and how advocates have, on the other side have talked about this, people don't realize it really is a mental condition. It's not an identity. So that confusion is very prevalent. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so let's address some arguments and concerns of the opponents. So this will be useful, hopefully, to you guys in your advocacy. So there's some good counter arguments. We go to the first one. So this is actually from the second time we presented to the Board of Education. These are our royal opposition. Most science gets decided, as you probably didn't realize, by chalk. In the sidewalk chalk. That's usually where most of the good studies and information is. So these guys were helping us out here. So yeah, you can look at all these things, gender isn't real, but your bigotry is. I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that statement, right? Gender isn't real. Well, if gender isn't real, why are we having a debate? Like, you guys can go home, right? This doesn't make any sense at all. And we support your kids, can't you? We support our kids too, but we support it the way we want to, not the way you want to, and that's the crux of the issue. They want to force their views on the rest of us, unfortunately. They're true believers, so many of the opponents in this. And anyway, so God is trans, very interesting theological idea, So anyway, you can kind of see where they are. Look out, LGBTQ people are everywhere. Right, well, some of them are working with me to fight this, actually. So like the Transgender Dysphoria Support Network is a group of transgender people that's fighting this. The Lesbian Appreciation Society in Ireland. There's a lot of gay and lesbian and transgender people that are absolutely on our side and working with us. I mean, we work with them a lot. So it just doesn't make any sense. So I'm like, yeah, show it to some of our friends. I mean, it just doesn't make any. There's no rhyme or reason to this. So we can go to the next slide. But anyway, that's the fun we were having in Frederick County one night, debating in the chalk. So the first thing is the myth that we have here. All these folks that are anti-trans right-wingers that want to do this. Really, like Dr. Erica Anderson, who's transgender, right? Like Dr. Lisa Littman, who's liberal. I mean, we can go through the list. Like almost everybody on our side is not anywhere close to that. They're almost all uniformly liberal. They're from Finland and Sweden and Scandinavian countries that are entirely progressive. GenSpect, I would say, is entirely, very much liberal organization. So I don't, that's what our opposition is wanting to do, is like paint everybody, as they often do, as being an extreme conservative, which I've never understood. I guess there's only one kind of conservative, which is extreme, like you can't be anything else. All right, so anyway, they want to attack us, right? So I'll go and say, well, what about these 12 studies? You're a bigot. No, really, have you read any of them? You're a transphobe. And that is the actual dialogue on the streets of Frederick County before some of these meetings. It's incredible. And then we disavow any kind of anti-trans right-wing agenda. I mean, again, Dr. Erica Anderson quit WPATH because of this. Lots of folks have. And then there's this idea that, like, we want to erase LGBTQ people. Why? That's horrible. Why would anyone ever do that? But that's a belief, and I don't know how much of it is truly believed and how much is smearing. I think there's a little bit of both, depending on the person. So anyway, those are the things. Just remind folks that they really are attacking the people and not the arguments. We can go to the next slide. All right, and then a very common thing is students are going to be harmed if they're outed, which is, of course, the wrong term. So outing used to be if two folks that were gay were in a relationship, you would let people know about that if you found out about it. That was outing. That was the original definition of outing, was just saying, oh, you know, Sam and John are gay, and now you know, right? So that was kind of outing their relationship. But what they're saying is outing is actually just telling a parent that their child has concerns in this area. That's not outing. Really, you're outing your 5-year-old? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's the belief, is that this is somehow going to harm them, but it's actually going to do the opposite. What typically happens, and Dr. Goonan has said this to me a lot, you know, what parents do is they love their kids more. They get more involved when they find out that there's a concern, right? It's not like they're going to go and kick their kids out of the house. But there's this idea from the Trevor Project. So if you see data from the Trevor Project, if you spend about 10 minutes looking at it, you can usually find, like, it's just riddled with problems. And so even if you accept their data without, you know, they did a convenience sample, and I think they, like, paid, you know, there's, like, prizes involved in filling out the survey and things. Only 0.3% of students are currently experiencing homelessness or housing instability. So this is the case that the opposition makes, is like, well, if you out these kids, they're going to be homeless, which is highly unlikely. And it doesn't really, that study doesn't really draw that conclusion at all. It just says at some point some of these kids were homeless, but homeless could be saying, like, at your uncle's house, that would be you being homeless. What most people picture when they're thinking about homelessness is like out on the streets, but this is like, I stayed with a family member for a week, and based on that qualifies as homeless. So if you dig into this research that the opposition has, it just never really holds up, unfortunately. All right, and then bad parents are going to find excuses. So yeah, child abuse is real, but it's fortunately very, very rare, and it's usually due to alcoholism or the parents' own mental health difficulties. It's not like, you know, being transgender is this thing that's really driving a lot of that. And then the other thing I like to remind some of our friends is the ROG kids, so the rapid onset gender dysphoria kids, the kids that are like teens and tweens that suddenly came out, they were, you know, really into girly things, and all of a sudden they decided they're a boy. These folks are actually typically from more liberal families. 88%, 88%, 85% support gay marriage, and then 88% believe transgender people should have the same rights and protections as others. I don't know why that's not 100, but it should be. So anyway, that's kind of where we are. And I try to remind some of my progressive friends that are like, you know, you guys are going to hurt these kids. I'm like, well, they're mostly your kids, so you guys should be good, right? Like, all right, so let's go to the next slide. All right, resistance rates. I think we've covered a lot of this. I will talk about the third bullet there. It's an authentic identity until it's not. So just think about sort of what's being asked of us as parents. Their 5-year-old says, I'm the opposite gender, and you're supposed to, you know, accept that. But then, you know, a few weeks later, maybe they're back to their other gender, or they're a teenager, and all of a sudden they're like, well, they were a lesbian, but now they're bisexual, and now they're asexual, and now they're non-binary, and, you know, like it changes all the time. And if you talk to teachers in some of these schools that are really into this, they're like, yeah, we have to start like every week with like, what is your name and pronoun this week, right? It's like way too much to keep up with. So if it's a truly authentic, permanent identity, which is what most written policies claim in Maryland, it's clearly not, because it's not permanent at all. It's changing all the time as these folks go through their identity exploration. So that's the one I'd point out on that slide. All right, we can go to the next one. And then the disproven original theory. Dr. Goonan talked about this a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit into it. So it's actually famously proven wrong in an unfortunately dramatic fashion. In the 1960s, this guy named John Money said, oh, I know how this works. Don't know how he figured out how he knew it. But he said, if you raise someone as the opposite gender for the first 30 months, it'll kind of take, right? So you raise them as a girl. So there's this famous boy, David Raymer, who accidentally had a horrible circumcision that actually castrated him by accident. It was not part of gender-affirming care. It was just an accident with the machine that was doing it. And so they raised him as a girl, and Dr. Money said, this will just take. Like, he'll just think he's a girl for life. Well, that didn't work at all. So actually, he reclaimed his birth sets and he actually committed suicide as an adult. So it's an unfortunate, sad story, but the original conception of gender identity was it's the first 30 months it kind of takes and you're good for life. And that's just obviously not true. And then we have a contradictory modern theory. So this is really in the realm of philosophy more than science. This is more like philosophers and folks that are kind of coming up with ideas, particularly queer theory. So there is an essentialist camp that believes everyone has an internal sense of gender identity, but nobody agrees how many genders there are. Like, are there 2? Are there 112? Or there's 8 billion people in the world, everybody's got one unique. We used to just call these personality traits, right? But now it's become gender identity. And then there's a performance camp. So it's like, it's not something that you are essentially in your being, right? The performance camp says, well, you perform gender. So I guess right now I'm performing maleness or something, and you're performing femaleness out there, right? I mean, that's what Judith Butler said. So she's an advocate of this thing called postmodern queer theory that says it's just something we choose to do. We just act our gender, basically. And then others, like Dr. Goonan and I, take more of a body-affirming view because we don't have a sense that we have a gender identity. The idea that everyone has a gender identity is really debatable. I didn't even know that was a thing until, last 5 years. I don't think most of you did. You are your body. You are what you were born as, right? So I think most people have that sense. And so that actually does a real dose of service to the people who have just a very strong connection with their body, and they just are their body. They are who they are. And then you go to school, and a teacher's going to say, well, you might not be. And everyone has a gender identity. Everyone doesn't. Some people just feel what they are kind of inherently. And then again, as Dr. Goonan said, there's no empirical evidence on this. This doesn't mean that one day we may not discover things in the brain. We just haven't discovered yet. So you can't make policy based on ideas that are speculative, and that's the kind of thing. If anyone in any policy circle says to you, and you see this all the time with like reading instruction and math instruction, well, we're ahead of the research. I've heard educators say, how are you ahead of the research? We're on the right side of history. That's not actually possible. It hasn't happened yet. You don't know what the right side of history is until it happens, and then you figure out in arrears, right? That's how history works. So if you hear these phrases, and they're thrown out a lot in public schools, there's no way to be on the right side of history until it happens, and there's no way to be ahead of the research until it happens. Right. So that's my comments on that. Okay, we can go to the next one. All right, so questions for opponents? Oh, they're not here. That's unfortunate. This is always my favorite part. I love to debate people. All right, so we can go to the next slide here. So just asking for a fair debate. I mean, this happened in math, right? So when I first got involved in education, we weren't debating this stuff. We were debating math, right? And they had their phrases too. So they would say, if we wanted to teach kids how to do like the standard way to carry, when you're adding 2 numbers, right? You go and carry the 10, 1, and all that stuff when you're adding. They would say that was rote memorization, right? Just like transphobia is a thing now, or racism, or whatever. They throw different labels at you. In math, they did it too. They said, oh, well, you just want rote memorization. You don't want kids to actually understand the math. Well, I'm a computer scientist. I kind of understand the math like I would like other kids to understand the math. But they say things like that that are kind of bizarre, right? So it's the same thing here. So you want to go and say, okay, well, is it fair? And I ask people this, and it really shuts them down, believe it or not. I say, is it fair to say anyone who disagrees with you is a bigot? And they go, well, you are. Okay, great. The next question, define a bigot, right? And you start asking them questions, and it doesn't take too many for them to kind of realize that maybe they don't have all the answers, right? And then I also like to remind them of this little thing called defamation that they seem to like to engage in a lot. I'm like, do you know what defamation is? You're kind of doing it right now. Maybe you want to reconsider, right? So it is important, I think, to protect yourself that way. Not in a threatening way, but just to remind them that, we're human beings. We have families. We have kids. We're not here to go and we're not attacking anyone. But when you do it to us, I just need to reflect back. Like, you understand what you're doing right now. You're actually building a case. I can call 3 lawyers right now. You're saying things you shouldn't be saying, right? And so again, never do it as a threatening way, but gently remind them of that, and usually people calm down after that. And then again, stop the name calling. Are willing to commit yourself to a free and fair debate without name calling. The answer so far in front of us has been no, but hopefully one day it will be. All right, we go to the next slide. And then, some parents are going to mistreat their kids, but is it fair to punish everybody for that? I mean, some people get into car accidents. We don't take everybody's license away, right? So you got to think about that. And then what I ask them is, okay, you disagree with our proposal, you think it's awful, great. What's your idea? And by the way, it has to be constitutional. So there's 100 years of Supreme Court decisions that our policy directly follows. We had lawyers look at it. It's exactly following the the First and the 14th Amendment. The religious expression and the parental rights that are guaranteed by the 14th. So you can come up with any policy you want that's different than ours, but respect those two provisions, and they're not going to be overturned. The Supreme Court is going to rule in our favor once these cases get there. It's the most conservative or originalist Supreme Court we've had in 100 years, and we've got 100 years of precedent. Their legal case is not looking good. It's just a matter of time before we get the right cases before the Supreme Court. All right, and then what I love to ask him is, okay, so you're saying that, I want my kid's birth name to be used at school, and you don't, right? The opponents don't in some cases. They have a transgender kid, and they want them to be known by the opposite sex pronoun. So that's great for you. With your written permission, I totally support it. But what about me? Like, I don't get to have that right too, right? So you have to relate it to them. I think is say, if it's good for you, if it's okay for your family to change your child's pronoun, it should be okay with you that I'm not changing my child's pronoun and name, right? It's what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and they don't have a lot of arguments for that. All right, so we can go to the next slide. And let's see here. Yeah, the science questions, 4,500% increase. Please explain that, opponents. Do you have any theories? There aren't really any good theories other than the ones that Dr. Goonan talked about, which is social media is spreading this. And one thing you can do, you will find that the opponents will argue something along the lines, well, it's not social contagion, it's social acceptance. So if you read our policy, we split the difference. We say socially mediated, so you can't really argue it. Maybe it's a little bit of both, right? It could be, right? A little bit of both, but the bottom line is it is socially mediated, no matter which your preferred term is, right? So if your opponents get hung up on social contagion, switch to social mediated, and then they don't have an argument because you're encompassing both of them. All right, let's see here. So yeah, explain the shift to the ratio. So it used to be all young boys. Now it's all teen and tween girls, or not all, but mostly teen and tween girls. So why? If women started getting most of the heart attacks of all the people that get heart attacks, which is not the case now, it's men who generally get the heart attacks, everyone would say, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why did it switch from men to women? Well, it switched from men to women here. So our opponents have to have an answer for that. So ask them, do you have an answer for that? They won't, but they need to know that they don't have an answer. And then, generally medical ethics is the least invasive means first, right? So I was on the tennis court a number of years ago, tripped, and thought my knee had an ACL tear, went to the doctor, they told me I did, I went to the specialist, they said, nope, you were misdiagnosed, just put ice on it, and a week later I was out playing tennis again, right? So imagine if I had a doctor that was really aggressive, oh yeah, let's do the ACL surgery. Well, I didn't have a torn ACL, right? So that's kind of what's happening with the gender medicine. They're taking a very aggressive approach, medically and also socially. The most aggressive thing you can do to a child that has gender dysphoria is changing their name and pronouns, which is what the schools are saying they're doing. They're taking the most aggressive approach first, without any evaluation, any pause, or even parental involvement. All right, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so I'll just hit a couple points here, and then I want to mostly take questions. Go to the next slide. All right, so this is a lot. Let's see, you can just pay attention to the headlines, right? We'll have you read all this. So secrecy versus transparency, I think we covered that. We can do the next slide. And these slides, again, will be available to all of you. So it's affirmative therapy for all, which is the current policy pretty much everywhere, versus parent choice. So that's how I would frame that issue. And again, the parent choice can include affirmative therapy. If you are a true believer as a parent, you really think that's best, you will probably be right in a small percentage of circumstances, right? So, somewhere between 2 and 20% of the kids that have this do go on to have a lifelong settled transgender identity. But do you really want to be, as inaccurate as, 80 to 98% inaccurate by choosing that, right? So that's what the schools are doing. They're basically choosing an error rate that's in the 80 to 98% range. They're going to be wrong most of the time by immediately affirming. Again, some kids will go on to do that, but that's got to be handled with the family. All right, let's see here. We'll go to the next one. Yeah, mixed-sex bathrooms and single-sex, I don't think I need to say too much more about that, but the idea is we should keep them separate, and there should be options for folks that aren't comfortable, single stalls, etc. Next one is going to be unsafe and unfair sports versus safe and fair. Not too much more needs to be said about that. I think you all know. We could just kind of discuss the evidence there. And let's see. Oh, one thing I will say about that before we go is, even if the schools are going to insist on allowing gender identity to drive it, one thing to ask for policy-wise is, okay, you're doing this thing, we don't like it. But can you put in your policy that every parent whose girl is playing on that team with that boy will be notified and will have to consent to it? So that at least they are knowing that they're potentially in danger in terms of collisions, etc. We think that's fair. Same thing for the overnight stays and the bathrooms, right? If you are in a school that doesn't have any gender dysphoric kids that are going to be in the opposite sex bathroom, fine. But if you are in a school that does, shouldn't the parents know that this is a possibility? And I think they should, and they should be able to work with the school to make arrangements. Not only for the safety, but also just religiously. You know, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, certain Christian denominations would not approve of that, right? So you have a religious objection there as well. All right, next one is, I think we've gone through the ideology versus the science, so we can skip that. All right, we can go straight to Q&A if you guys are ready. Lisa, you want to be our MC? I think there's just one, so we might have to shoot. There was.
I was just gonna, if you raise your hand, I'll come over.
Yeah, ma'am.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if a lot of this, especially in the medical profession, is driven by economics.
Yes. It definitely is. You know, it's a $2 billion industry now, and it's projected to go to 5 in another 10 years. But I do think it's more than that, because the ability to debate questions has dramatically diminished. So you've seen that with COVID, and there's a bit of ideological pressure of the academies, of the journal editorial boards, that is very concerning, very concerning. So the same things that we saw with COVID are going on here, where you're not allowed to debate, you're not allowed to question. But the economic incentives are tremendous.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've done this comparison a lot, but if you look at the history, so we don't do lobotomies anymore, right? But did you know they won the Nobel Prize for medicine? Right, so I have to remind folks that, like, people get things wrong. Scientists get things wrong, right? What about the repressed memories of the 1990s? People went to jail because at therapist's suggestion, they suddenly discovered they had sex abuse that never happened, and they sent their parents to jail, right? Do you remember that? What about the current opioid crisis? This was a combination of government lack of oversight and pharmaceutical companies kind of pushing for this new drug that was a miracle drug, but wasn't really, right? So there's actually a pretty recent history of this going back for pretty far of, medical folks getting it wrong.
The American Academy of Pediatrics took money from the infant formula companies in the 80s and 70s, and every mother was sent home with formula. So we were actively discouraging breastfeeding. Right. And it was financially driven.
Yeah. Oh, hey Lisa. Thank you both. You guys were phenomenal, as always. So I have a comment and also a question. My comment was, and you touched on this briefly, but I just wanted to point out to the profile of a typical child that experiences gender dysphoria, just because I think a lot of people in this room might be affected, and that happens to be upper to middle class to upper middle class white girls. So, and you said typically liberal, which, you know, I'm just citing Abigail Schreier's book as well. So, but I thought that might be helpful to people in this room. But my question is, as you know, the Maryland State Health Standards has implemented and are enforcing that children be taught this at the earliest of ages. And what is your advice to fighting against that, so that, you know, it's not, we can get it out of the curriculum, out of the health standard curriculum?
Yeah, great question, Kit. And so we've been doing that in Frederick County. You guys have had a lot more success in Carroll County. You have some options there that we don't. We did get it delayed by a year. They'll never admit that we were the ones that did it, but it was due to come into kindergarten this year in Frederick County. They had said they were going to teach gender identity. And so I had a bunch of folks sent them basically some of the talking points from the slide and said, well, you know, this is a disproven theory, it's debatable, people who like it don't even agree on what it is, so maybe you guys shouldn't be teaching it. And then they started finding videos that were really, really bad that said, like, sex is on the spectrum. No, it's not. So we presented the evidence. So I would say just being armed with those facts, and we can provide those for those of you that want that, is really helpful. Because people, even though they don't want to admit it, they don't want to be embarrassed if someone's pointing out science that they haven't seen before, and for a lot of them it has. So I think that's helpful. But really just being aware of it. I mean, just doing the Freedom of Information Act requests, looking at the health curriculum, it's sometimes just there, like in Frederick County, 7th and 8th grade, it's just listed. It's like memorize the policy 443, so that's the policy I reference as being so bad. They actually have the kids memorize the definitions that are inaccurate in our policy that is inaccurate. That's actually required for 7th and 8th graders. So just knowing that that's happening is a big part of it too. I don't know if that got to the heart of your question, but that's my first thought.
But Tom, wouldn't you say it's also aggressive activism, public activism? Because, you know, the logic is not going to change their minds. It's going to be lots of parents, lots of publicity, lots of activism, lawsuit threats, media coverage, not logic. And we got to play aggressive and just as dirty as they do.
I understand that Monday is supposed to be National Coming Out Day, and it's not being very well advertised, but it's going to be happening in elementary schools. However, is Monday a holiday with no school? And it's supposed to be for elementary school kids.
So this is in this county?
I don't know.
I haven't heard of it in Frederick.
I don't know, and I hadn't heard of it either. It just seemed to be suddenly on the radio and crawling on television, and it's maybe being kept a little bit quiet.
Yeah, I couldn't comment too much. I don't know if it's happening in my county. It sounds like it's definitely happening in yours. In elementary school, kids have not experienced a sexual awakening. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They would even know. So, and really shouldn't. So.
We'll take 2 more questions. I think, did you have some right?
Hi, thank you both again for being here and all you're doing. My question is kind of for the other side, for young parents who might have, let's say, a young boy, around like 2 or 3, who wants to wear the tutu or the dress. What is your advice for them so that they don't start seeking, you know, the medical professionals and, you know, they don't know where to go?
So there's some excellent books that are just now coming out to help parents with kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria. And there's one called When Your Kids Say They're Trans, that's literally just now going to be available on Amazon, written by Stella O'Malley. For, you know, parents know how to parent kids, and kids do all kinds of stuff. And accepting them for what they want to do is really important. But the vast majority of kids who experiment, like, you know, for example, there are the advocates for gender affirmation who say if a child pulls barrettes out of her hair, that means that she's trans. And we all know who've had kids that kids pull barrettes out of their hair. So, you know, boys who want to play with dolls or wear tutus, you know, boys will want to wear all kinds of stuff. They love high heels. Yeah. You leave it alone. You don't make a big deal out of it. You don't talk about it. You don't sexualize. The big thing that I think is going on that's really driving a lot of the discomfort of all kids, whether they get into gender dysphoria or not, is hypersexualization. Discussion of sex, about sex, exposure to porn, all of that, that's driving the non-binary choice, in my opinion. So these young girls who are very intimidated by the idea that they have to be so sexually oriented at such an early age. So what do? They avoid the whole thing entirely, and they declare that they're non-binary. Those are teenagers. But in terms of little kids, you just let it go. You just let it go. And they will grow up to be boys, and some of them may grow up to be gay boys, and so, you know, but the big thing is not to focus too much attention on it, let them be kids.
We're going to take one more question and then I'm going to close it out.
Hi. My question is in regards to puberty blockers and future sterility. I had heard on a podcast that something like 80% of kids that got puberty blockers were infertile later, and I wondered what you could say about that.
So that depends on how long they are on them and at what age they start them. So if they start them at Tanner stage 2 or an early stage and they're on them for an extended period of time, they will, what is going on then? The testes or the ovaries are maturing and developing the capacity to generate gametes, either eggs or sperm, and you're stopping that. And so it does increase the likelihood that they will not be fertile. That's one of the major complications. But again, because we aren't, if we were treating this as experimental and we were actually tracking these kids properly, then we would have better information. But there's no question but what puberty blockers alone or puberty blockers with cross-sex hormones are very impactful in terms of long-term fertility.
Okay, I have one more. And then maybe after we wrap it up, maybe you can ask our special guests your questions individually.
I want to go back to the schools are putting in psychiatrists into the elementary, middle, and high schools here in Howard County, and how that actually circumvents the need for a parent to be involved in the conversation at all. So normally you would have to be the one to take your child to see one of these counselors, and now they can just go ask to see one, and you will never know. And what is the answer to that?
So there's one legal answer, which unfortunately the age got reduced to 12 to self-consent to mental health counseling in Maryland.
Yep.
But Rosalind Hanson, who's in the Moms for Liberty in Montgomery County, has a nice video she put out about this, and they're doing it to her 10-year-old, so it's illegal. But the counselor said, "Oh yeah, we're going to come and check in on them, 2 to 3 times a year, and whatever we say is confidential." She said, "No, it's not going to be confidential." She wrote them a letter, but that's actually illegal. They should not be doing that. They need parental consent. For 12 and up, you're going to have to, you got a legal fight on your hands there, right? Because the law is that they can self-consent. But you can obviously write letters and say you don't want that to happen and offer your reasons why. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to say, my son, who is 8 at Waverly Elementary School, was called in, the counselor, the psychiatrist came in and said to my son, "Do you want to have counseling?" And he said, "Okay, I'll do it." He didn't know, never asked me anything. I just found out today because my son said, "Mom, I didn't do anything bad in school, but I went to see the counselor." Okay? It was 20 minutes. And we're asking him, he's getting upset because he thinks that he did something wrong. And we said, "No, honey, you didn't do anything wrong." He said, "It was 20 minutes. The door was closed. The window is blocked with paper."
Yeah, it's highly inappropriate, and I would be...
We are going to be sending an email this evening. He's a good child. He answered a paper saying that other people are important, and they used it to make it seem like he didn't think he was important, that just other people. My son isn't selfish. He's the oldest of 4, and you have never met a sweeter little boy. If that was a bad person, he could have been molested. And he's honest, and he told me, but I wouldn't have known. So that's a personal example, just today. And I had planned on going this, and I just think that the Lord is faithful and orchestrated that for me.
I'm glad you know. I mean, at least you know, right? And you can take action, and maybe your lawyer should send a letter too.
Yes. Does it? Go ahead.
I, along with other
So, I guess my question is, what, if anything, can we talk to them without giving them like way too much information?
Oh, talk to your child or
Yeah.
Oh, that's me.
What we're encouraging is that you ask questions and you establish a relationship where they feel comfortable telling you what's going on at school so that you're informed as to what's going on. And then you can interpret for them what they're learning. Now, when it gets to they're telling you things that are very disturbing to you, which I fear is going to be happening with this new curriculum in Maryland, that's where you're going to have to shift gears and come together and talk about how you're going to organize to aggressively, and actively protest what they're doing at the schools. Because so you're going to operate at two levels. One is the mom who wants to hear what the child is hearing and then help the child process what they've heard, including what's inaccurate, right? So you're very early on going to be saying, that's actually not true. Boys cannot become girls. Girls cannot become boys. And that's not true. And then you're setting up a dynamic where you're saying to your children, the school is giving you bad information. But, you can do that with math, and you can do that with history and other things too. So it's not just about sex.
And just from a school advocacy perspective, I'm working on, some of you've already seen it in Moms for Liberty, sort of like a very long list of Public Information Act request questions that you can send in. One is going to be on counseling, and you can just ask, I would encourage you to ask, what is the policy and procedure for soliciting a counseling session from a child? That does not make any sense, right? So I would say any of these issues where you feel like you don't have information, they're legally required to respond to you in 30 days. So you can. So I would keep them coming, because you never think of things that might happen and ask, because you got to wait 30 days for it, and start to send those in. That helps with the transparency issue a lot. They will try to do some things to you, like say, oh, well, you wanted to know if there was like CRT taught in kindergarten. That'll cost you $18,000 for us to retrieve the record. I mean, they play games, right? I've seen it happen. So you have to be careful. But if that happens, there's a bunch of business who can probably help you deal with those things. But definitely just asking for the information on a policy level, as well as what Dr. Goonan just said, dealing as a mom. Oh, so to get access to the PIA request? So it's on most schools' website. Either they have an electronic form where you can fill it out. I don't ever use that. I use my own email so that I have a record of when I send it. If you send it through their form, you don't have a date, right? Only they have it. So make sure you send it from your email. Find out who it is. It's usually an ombudsperson, or there's like a legal assistant that does it. There's someone whose job, or several people whose job it is to handle these things. And they love me. I rack up the bills for them in terms of, sending people around to collect information. I keep them employed, right? I'm the best thing for their careers, so help them out. Ask lots of questions.
Anybody has time to ask a question? Good.
I brought some business cards if anybody needs to talk about a personal situation. This is what I do in retirement in addition to golf, so feel free to tell them.
Let's give our special guest Cindy, and thank you. Just going to close up here. Just to let you know, that's what Moms for Liberty is all about. We've been filing PIAs since we started our chapter. My fellow chapter chairs have. So I would say definitely join your local chapter of Moms for Liberty, because they probably already addressed your concerns, and they can keep you informed, help you with PIAs, anything to do with parental rights. That's what we do. So definitely do that. I wanted to thank Tom and Kate for taking time out of their busy schedules to share this very important knowledge with us tonight. I want to thank our Moms for Liberty chapter for working so hard to put on this event. A special thanks goes to Tootie Adler, who took the lead on this. Without her, this would not have happened. I'd like to thank our member, Michelle Shalik, our Moms for Liberty chapter chairs who came. Thank you, ladies, to support us, and all of our core group of joyful warriors who support our cause. Thank you all for coming. It's vital that we fight back against the forces that believe they have not only the right, but the responsibility to indoctrinate our kids to the point of ignoring our God-given right to raise our children with our own values and beliefs. If you're not a member, you can sign up at the registration table, and we do have a little jar out there for donations if you feel led to donate to our cause. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Cleo, for telling us. Sorry,